Welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. But to start off, I want everybody to stand up. Come on, stand up for me. I start this with a little acknowledgement for all of you. I want to thank all of you for taking this day out to spend with us. I know each and every one of you are entrepreneurs out there. Your time is valuable. We value your time. I hope you've appreciated all the great speakers that we've had this morning. I want to make the most use of the next 35 minutes of your time, but give yourselves a hand just to start this session. Now, you might notice I'm talking about a very spicy topic. You can all sit down. A very spicy topic, returns, so I'm buttering you up. My name is Bednowitz, and I lead the protections team at eBay. And what do my team and I cover? Things that are very important to you as sellers. Our eBay money-back guarantee, returns, what I'm going to talk about today, protection from bad buyers, which I'm also going to talk about today as part of this, and protection from chargebacks. So a lot of key topics. And if you haven't picked it up already, my accent isn't British. I don't even come from this side of the pond. I came all the way from the US to talk to you guys, to take this coveted after lunch spot to talk to you guys about returns. Now, you might not know it, but actually there's a lot of thinking behind taking this spot, this after lunch spot. I think the organizers of the event thought, well, we need something to keep them awake. So let's put returns here, because that's always a hot topic, a spicy topic with sellers. And I thought, well, I need a time when you guys are going to be too tired to throw anything at me. So that would be perfect after lunch. But all jokes aside, this is a very serious topic. It's my honor to be here to talk about it with you guys. It can be a heavy and emotional topic. I hope we can have a little bit of fun together as we go through this, though. So let's start off and let me cover with you what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to start from the absolute basics. Now, I know everybody in this room is an experienced seller, so you might not feel you need this, but to get beyond the basics, it's good to just be, as a reminder, to set a foundation for what we want to talk about. So I'm going to start with just why do you get returns as a seller? Then what's your responsibility as a seller when you get a return? And then we'll get to the hot topic. So how does eBay protect you, the seller, from bad buyers, and what do we do about bad buyers? Now, I'm going to make this more of a two-way conversation with you guys. There's quite a few of you out there, but I'm just going to ask for points in the presentation for you guys to raise your hands and participate, so it's not just me talking to you guys. And that's for you guys to learn from one another, and for me to learn a bit from you guys as well. So I hope we'll enjoy this together. So let's jump in. All right, so first topic, why do you get returns as a seller? Number one, the buyer changed their mind. You can see all the reasons up here why a buyer changes their mind. They ordered this item by mistake, they don't like the color. Now, how many of you in this room, as a buyer, have changed your mind about a purchase and then you made a return? Raise your hand. Come on, everybody's hand should be up. You must be some really perfect shoppers out there if you've never made a mistake in buying an item. But almost everybody has this type of experience. Now, on the other side, we've got the item not as described. INAD or SNAD, significantly not as described. This is the item's damaged, it won't turn on, it's missing parts, or as a buyer, I bought something and the item doesn't match what I saw in the listing. The next topic is, what is your responsibility as a seller when you get these types of return requests? Now, I'm going to go through each one. They're largely the same, but there are some differences that I want to highlight and call out for you guys. The underlying principle is that we try to make returns as easy as possible for both buyers and sellers. I know we don't always succeed at that, but that's the principle that we try to espouse and what underlies what we do. So when you get a return, if your return policy is 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, if the return is within your return window, we'll just auto-accept that return and give that buyer a label for them to send that return back to you. Then you've got 2 business days to refund the buyer, and that's complete. Now, if a buyer makes a return request outside of your window, so you have 14-day return policy and you get a return request on day 15 or 16, or you have a 30-day return policy and you get a return request on day 31 or 32, you don't have to do anything. You can decline that request. And I know sellers sometimes get confused about this and they say, wait, I got this request. Are there negative impact if I don't accept the request? I want to make sure that you guys all know you're not obligated to accept that request. The only reason why we give you the option to accept that request is to say, hey, if you want to give better customer service and you think honoring that request will deliver better customer service, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. Now, let's talk about the other side. Item not as described. If the buyer selects a reason that the item is not as described, and the item is covered by our eBay money-back guarantee policy I just talked about. Now, almost all items on the site are covered by our eBay money-back guarantee policy. There's very few exceptions. So in almost all cases for all of you, anytime there's an item not as described, it will be covered. So we give buyers 30 days to make this type of claim. And in many cases, we'll also auto-accept that return, but in some cases, we'll give you 3 days to work it out with the buyer. So those are cases where it's damage, missing parts, or cross-border returns. And you can reach out to the buyer. You can offer them a partial refund. You can offer them replacements, something to make it right. Now, if at the end of those 3 days, if you're unable to make it right, then we'll again give them a label, or if there's still a problem on the buyer side, they can escalate and come back to us. Now, that's the basics that I talked about. I hope you guys learned a little bit from that, but now with that foundation, we can move on to the more advanced topic, or the hot topic, the reason why I flew all the way here from the US. How do we protect you from bad buyers? All right, so to start off, what exactly is a bad buyer behavior? Now, I know there's a wide range of bad buyer behaviors that you guys have probably encountered on the platform. What I want to focus on today are those behaviors that have economic impact on you as a seller. So there are 3 basic flavors of that. The first one is the buyer changes their mind about an item, but they lie and they say, oh, it's not as described, and they do that in order to get a free return. Because under the eBay money-back guarantee policy, if the item's not as described, the buyer gets a free return. The second one is the buyer gets an item, they use it, they damage it in some way, and then they send it back to you. And basically, the second one is the item comes back in a condition different from what you sent it out as. And then the third one is the most damaging. These are essentially virtual shoplifters. And I hope not too many of you have experienced this, but where a buyer gets an item, they send back an empty box, or they send back an item of little or no value to basically steal that item from you and from us. And those are the worst types of buyers on our platform. Now, what do we do to protect you? Now, in this first case, we call this a false, significantly not as described claim, because the buyer is saying the item, it can be SNAD or INAD, item not as described, but the buyer is basically making a false claim. In that case, the protection that you have is that you can report that buyer, and if you report that buyer, then you will get a label credit up to £3.50. In the second case, the buyer sends back a damaged item, used item, you can withhold some portion of that refund from that buyer, up to 50% of that value from that buyer to cover the loss value to you, the seller. And then the third one is when you have that type of extreme experience where the buyer sends back an empty box, then you contact us and ask us to step in. Now, what's not listed here, in addition to all of those, to prevent any repeated issues with buyers on this or any other behavior, you can always block a buyer. So if you block a buyer, they can't buy from you anymore. They can't cause you problems any longer. But I'm going to spend a lot of time on these first two. I'm going to dive into them in more depth. And in some cases, I'll be repeating myself with what I just said. And the reason why, if you're going to pay attention to anything that I say in this presentation, it's the next two slides that I'm going to go through, because that's the meat. That's why I'm here, is I want to make sure that you guys feel protected. And repetition is the mother of learning. And just in case you guys, while I was talking before, you're daydreaming, checking a text, thinking about dinner, whatever the case is, I want to really drive that point home with you guys. So, requesting a credit for returns postage for a false SNAD. So how does this work? Okay, so if the buyer, as I said, made a false claim, you need to report that buyer to us. You accept the return. Once you reported it, if that report is accepted, then you'll get a label credit. That label credit will appear on your next statement for up to £3.50, depending on how much you paid for shipping. And the rationale behind that is that the buyer is trying to get free shipping by misreporting this as a significantly not as described case. And so we want to cover those shipping costs, those return shipping costs for you. And that £3.50 covers about 90% of your shipping costs of items on the platform. Now, I know there are outliers to that, and we've heard feedback on that, and something that we're working on, but for vast majority of items, that should cover the shipping costs. Now, the next point that I want to bring out is that if you use this tool, there are no negative repercussions for you. We'll remove any negative feedback. There's no impact in standards or service metrics for reporting a buyer. So I have some questions for you guys on this. How many of you have had what we're calling here as a false SNAD? Raise your hand. Okay, that's unfortunate. It's most of the audience. Now, how many of you have ever reported a buyer for a false SNAD? Good, so that a lot of you are aware of this credit. How many of you were aware of this credit and didn't report a buyer even though you got a false SNAD? Oh, good. Okay, so everyone, so what I'm hearing from you guys is you're aware of the credit, you use it when you need to use it, you report the buyers. That's great. I was afraid that there would be a chunk of you that didn't use it because you're afraid of repercussions, because I've heard that in other discussions I've had like this. So that's great. But in general, just the point that I want to bring across, I'm really going to emphasize on the next slide too, is that our protections come with no strings attached. Like, we want you to use it when you have problems. We want you to feel like we have your back. And I know I read a lot of the comments from you guys, a lot of the feedback. Murray referenced this in his talk that these protections that I'm coming out for, we've heard the feedback from you guys, and that's why I want to make sure that you guys are aware of it. We've expanded eligibility of these tools, and we've been promoting them. So let's talk about the next one. Oh, I have a short how-to video, so I'm not going to tell you how to use this. It sounds like most of you know how to use it, but here's a quick video on how to use the false SNAD label credit.
Don't agree with the reason a buyer gave a return? You can request a postage credit. Here's how. Go to your Seller Hub and select Returns under the Orders tab. Click on the return ID and then on Report Problem on the bottom right. Check the box that says Disagree with the reason provided. Add photos and explain the situation. Share more details to increase your chances of getting a postage credit. Next, go ahead and issue the refund. We'll review your case. If it's approved, you'll get a postage credit to help cover the cost of the return. You'll see it on your statement at the end of the month. This is just one way to protect sellers and keep our marketplace safe.
All right, I hope that video was helpful. Now, the next protection I want to talk about is the partial refund tool that I just referenced. Now, first point I want to raise, and I'm sure it applies to most of you in this room, you need to be top rated or above standard in order to have access to this tool. If you are, then you'll automatically have access to this tool. So how does this work? If you get an item back, used, damaged, missing parts, basically if you get an item back that's not in the condition that you sent it out in, then you can withhold up to 50% of that item's value. Now we have guidelines within the tool that tell you how much you should withhold based on what the damage is to that item. Now, I've heard this, on this particular tool, I've heard quite often, people are afraid because the buyer's aware that, hey, you have withheld money from them, so that you're afraid that you might get negative feedback or it might affect standards, and so sellers are wary of using this tool. And the point that I really want to drive home here is we protect you. So we'll remove that negative feedback. You'll have no issues in standard service metrics, just like I said on the last slide. There are no strings attached to using this tool. The only thing there is with this tool is if we find that you are constantly using it, if you are basically abusing the tool, using it a lot more frequently than any other seller in your cohort or that's like you, then we'll turn off access to the tool. That's it. And you can even appeal that. If you have documented evidence and you feel, hey, I'm totally justified in all the times I've just had a wave of these things happen to me, then you can still appeal that decision. So there really is no downside. And why I'm really emphasizing this is we've seen you guys have told us that, hey, I'm getting a lot more of these types of issues happening over the past year, and it's making you unhappy. And we also see, relative to our other markets, that you're not using this tool at the same rate that they are. So some of you may have seen we've been marketing this tool. That's why I'm making this point. But I want to ask the questions. How many of you have had a used or damaged return? Okay, most of the audience. Now, how many of you were aware of this partial refund tool? Okay, so not so many. So good. Building awareness. Now, we've been marketing it, so I would have hoped to see that number a bit bigger, but I'm glad some people are aware. How many of you, for those of you that are aware, how many of you saw a promotion recently that made you aware of the tool? Nobody. Okay. I guess we need to do better with our promotions here. And then the last question, how many of you were aware of the tool but did not use it because of fear of some type of repercussion for you? Yeah, that's what I thought. A number of hands went up for that. That's the reason that I really want to drive home this message where I've said this is the part to listen to, because this tool, every time, and I just had a conversation with a seller upstairs who's talking about how valuable using this tool has been for their business. So please, 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 if you have an issue, use the tool. You know, I came here, I flew all the way here just to tell you guys to do that. You know, and this is something that it costs us money if the buyer appeals, but we want to make sure that you guys feel protected on our platform. You know, you guys are working hard. You've heard all the speakers talking about all the challenges that you're facing kind of in the macro environment that we can't control. Now, this is something that we can help you with and we can control, so please use it. So just like with the last one, for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is how you, and that's the other thing, actually, I forgot this point. Not only do we protect you from standards, from negative feedback, we also protect you from chargebacks. If that buyer goes and files an external chargeback, you are not liable for that chargeback. So let me go to the video on how this tool works.
Did a return come back damaged or with missing parts? Here's what you can do. Go to your Seller Hub and select Returns under the Orders tab. Click on the Return ID. Scroll down to the bottom right of the page and click on Report Problem. Select the checkbox that best describes your situation. For example, say you sold a laptop and received the laptop back without the charger. You would check the box, Item was missing parts. Or say you sold a toy in its original packaging and it was returned open. You would select Item was opened. You can also select more than one checkbox if needed. Next, you can choose an amount or a percentage of the refund to help cover the cost of the missing or damaged item. Check our deduction guidelines to find a fair price. Make sure to include photos and comments to let your buyer know why you are withholding part of the refund. Next, click Refund Now and you're set. This is just one way to protect sellers and keep our marketplace safe.
All right, I hope that made it clear how to use the partial refund tool. So I've talked to you about what we do to help protect you. Now, what do we do to these bad buyers to ensure a safe and trusted marketplace? So the first question is, how do we even identify a bad buyer? And the first point on the slide is all of you reporting to us. And you might say, well, why? Well, remember, we don't see the item. You guys send the item directly to the buyer, so we never see it outside of authentication guarantee categories where we do see and touch the item. The vast majority of our site, we don't ever see the item. So we have to rely on some sort of signal to say that there's a problem. So we need reports from you guys. And use the tools that I just talked about. So if you report the buyer for a false NAD, we'll see that data. But if you use the partial refund tool, that actually generates a report against that buyer as well. So we know that there was some problem with that transaction. Because I look at buyer report or seller reports of buyer. I look at that data quite often, my team and I. And here's what I see. There's a big chunk of buyers that are reported by a seller. All right, we should look into all of these. Well, when we just say how many of these buyers are reported by more than one seller, it goes down to less than 10%. So that means one of two things. Number one, and I think both of them are true. Number one is that our marketplace is a gray space. So you send something out, the buyer sees it and says, hey, this is not as described. This isn't the item that I bought. This is a different fit, doesn't look like the pictures. They send it back and you say, no, this is the item that I sent out. This is exactly as described. And it's an opinion, it's subjective. And I think there's a lot of that. That can also happen with what a buyer thinks is damage and you think is damage. Maybe they open the box, they don't think that's damage, you think that's damage. I've heard things like this from sellers and from buyers. So there's a lot of that happens, and generally good buyers just get reported once. But the other piece why buyers may only be reported once is that you guys may not be reporting them to us. And so we don't see all the data. So some of these buyers that only get one report actually have trends, and we should be seeing that information. So please report buyers when you have problems. Because the second thing that we use to identify a bad buyer is suspicious behavioral trends. So we don't see the items, but the combination of reports from you guys combined with, let's look at the buyer themselves. Do they have excessive claims, excessive returns, excessive chargebacks? Do they look like they're padding their feedback? What does that mean? That means they go and they buy a bunch of low-priced items to get feedback. So they open a new account, but instead of it being 0 or 1 feedback, they have 10 feedback quickly, and then they go and they try to abuse a seller. So we look at all of that. So these are the things that today we do. And then I want to share with you that this is important. There are things that we're enhancing our approaches, that my team and I are developing. So 2 key things here. One is a data science model. So looking at over the variables that I talked about, sorry, that's a typo, it should be data science. In the middle, I talked about a few key data points that we look at. What the data scientist can build is looking at 170 different behavioral trends to identify a potential bad buyer, so we can identify more bad buyers and take action against them before they impact you guys on the platform. And then the second one is identity linkage. So we suspend buyers from the platform for bad behavior, but then they come back under a different account. And we want to be able to identify that, hey, this is the same buyer. Now, but we have to be careful with this, because how would you feel if you got suspended because, if I got suspended because there's another Bednowitz in another city or country, or if there's someone living at my address but in a different city. Like, we have to be sure it really is the same person, and that's why we're taking time to develop this. But these should be live to protect you guys before the end of the year. And we're close to the end of the year, so it'll be very soon. So let me ask, again, question. So how many of you, when you encounter a bad buyer, how many of you consistently report those bad buyers to us? Okay, it's a chunk of the audience. I'd say probably 20%. How many of you don't report bad buyers to us when you encounter them? Okay, a couple of people there. Thank you for being honest. Now, for those of you that don't report buyers, how many of you don't report buyers because you are afraid of repercussions? Okay, so there's repercussions here. But how many of you don't report buyers because you think we're not going to do anything about it? Yeah, okay. That's the one that I hear most often. And I understand. We can't tell you the actions we take on these buyers, but I came here, flew all the way here. I've said it a number of times because I need your help. I need you to report buyers, and I promise you that my team and I, we look at this information, we look at the reports that you give us, and it may not always seem like that, but understand that just because you see a buyer as bad, it doesn't mean that we can take action on them. It means that we will look at them, that we will investigate them. But we don't even know to investigate them if you don't tell us about them. And the more that you report buyers, the faster we can take action against them. So if in reality that 10% that's reported by more than one buyer, if that's by more than one seller, if that should be 20%, then the faster that you guys tell us, the faster that we can take action against them. And we do. You may not know this, but we do take actions. What actions do we take? So right over here. We do start by warning the buyer, depending on the severity. But for repeated offenders or for severe actions or severe violations like those virtual shoplifters, we'll suspend them from the platform. Now, this isn't always visible to you guys, but my team and I, we action thousands and thousands of buyers that we find that are bad on the platform, and we want to do more of that. We don't want these buyers on the platform. I read forums of people saying, hey, eBay won't take action against buyers. We always side with the buyer. I understand the perception. I understand why it's there. But we do take actions against buyers, and we want to protect sellers, and we want these buyers off of our platform. So please help us help you. Report those buyers when you have issues. Now, that's the end of my formal presentation. I was hoping to have a bit of time to take questions from the audience, but before I do that, I've had a number of these types of conversations with sellers, and myself and my team just collected a few FAQs that I'll just answer proactively before going to you guys. So the number one question that I get in these forums, why can't I leave negative feedback for buyers? Why? Okay, for those of you, I feel you. I hear your pain. I understand completely. And for those of you that have been on the platform a long time, we used to allow you to leave negative feedback for buyers. Why did we stop doing that? Well, you as a seller, you've gotten negative feedback before, right? It hurts. It stings, especially if you feel it's undeserved. But you have a business on eBay, so you'll say, okay, I'll get over it and I'll keep selling. A buyer does not. A buyer has very much less vested in eBay. And so what we found is that when buyers got negative feedback, they didn't come back very often. And so if you have this 90% of buyers that are reported that actually only got reported once, that are getting negative feedback, that are then leaving our platform, that hurts all of us, right? So we don't want that. So the report a buyer function is basically the way you can't leave public feedback, but you can at least leave private negative feedback so that we see what's wrong with that buyer. Now the second one, why doesn't eBay tell me what happens when I report a buyer? Now that's why you think we don't do anything. I want to. We want to tell you what we do. But the law says we can't. You'd be breaking the law. Privacy laws say, I can't come to you and say, hey, this is what I did to this buyer. I know you'd love for me to be able to say, I suspended this buyer because you reported them. I found in your favor on this case. I can't. So you're going to have to take it on faith that I'm here for a reason, that we do actually take action on buyers, even if I can't tell you about it. And then the final piece, why can buyers create multiple accounts? I've heard this a lot. For good buyers, the reason why we allow them to create multiple accounts is we want to make it frictionless to buy on eBay, and they don't cause problems. So someone logs in as a guest once, and they come back, then they put one email address, and they forget that they had that email address, they put a different email address. We just want them to be able to buy items on the platform. We don't want to give them a bunch of friction remembering what email or what password they use, because they're not as vested in eBay as we are. Some buyers are, but not all of them. Now, the problem happens not in the good buyers, but in the bad buyers who use that to abuse you guys. And so, like I said, my team and I are developing things to catch this, and also when we suspend a buyer, we look for any linked accounts, and we suspend all of those linked accounts. That basically linked accounts means the same identity. Okay. So that's all of the FAQs. So now there are a couple of mics that'll be going around. So I want questions from you guys. Just 2 ground rules before I take questions. Number 1, I know some of you've raised your hands that you have issues going on. Please don't ask me about a specific case. Be cognizant that you've got other sellers here. Try to make it something that's relevant, not just, hey, I have this issue with this buyer. And then 2, please keep it friendly. All right. Where's the mic?
You go.
I think we have a mic runner coming. Over there. Mic runner. All right.
Are eBay doing anything to...
Wait. Before you do, tell me what your name is and what category you sell in.
My name's Chris, and I sell casually these days.
You sell casually?
As a consumer seller.
Okay.
Are eBay doing anything to enable warranty returns, specifically after a returns period have expired? I'm thinking maybe 10 months after a purchase if there's a problem, but the product should have a warranty. How do I then contact the seller again?
Yeah, so the extended ability, so this requires development work on our part to be able to extend that return window, and this is not the first time we've had that request. It's something that I can just say we're looking into. I don't have any concrete timeline. I can't tell you that that's definitely going to happen in 2023. It's been something on the list, but it's just not been the top priority. I mean, you've heard all the other things that have gone on. It's something that it might happen next year. But as of now, we don't have that capability. All right, next question. All right, well, next door, and then we'll go to this gentleman.
So it's David Bracken. Stuff you sell, we sell predominantly in fashion.
Okay, fashion sellers, so you get a lot of this.
Yeah, we get a lot of returns. What you've laid out as a process there looks a very simple, straightforward, agreeable process. It does not match my lived experience of how returns work on eBay. How do you hear from us, other than you fly here and we sit here and talk, how do you hear from us that stuff is broken? Because when I talk to the guys in customer service, they go, yeah, we know that's a problem. There's no way for us to report that. It doesn't get back. So how do you know that the engineering and the coding and the development and the processes do not match what you've put up on those slides?
So you're saying, well, I mean, we're not perfect. If you want to report to us, so there are surveys that we send out, so I always look at them, my team looks at these types of post-claim surveys. We send out ongoing surveys, so we review the data that you send us, as well as when you type things in, we review that. I'm happy to give you my contact details and hear from you directly. I mean, that's, like you said, the reason why I've flown out here and why we're here is to hear feedback from you guys, but we do have multiple listening channels. And I know, I mean, I alluded to it early on in my presentation. I know returns are far from perfect on eBay, and it's something that we are continually investing in, but we have a backlog of things that in different sites and different areas don't work perfectly. So definitely happy to hear the things that you've encountered in your business and see what we can do about it. Thank you for the question. All right, this gentleman over here.
Hello.
And this, unfortunately, is our last one because we're just at time, right?
So name's David. Category is used motorcycle parts. I'm sure it relates to the car parts as well, but I find customers buying parts to try and resolve an issue because it tends to be cheaper than actually going to a motorcycle shop and actually paying for the label to find that problem. But if let's say they fit a relay and it doesn't resolve their issue, I then go online to the order details, find their contact number and call them to try and resolve it. But they return it for a refund. And thinking about partial refund, if I was to offer a partial refund less the cost of the postage, am I protected if they was to leave a negative feedback?
So you're saying you get the item back, and because it's bulky and somewhat expensive...
No, it's more that... So they've fitted it to try and resolve an issue, but it doesn't resolve that issue, and the issue actually lies elsewhere. But they just return it, but all they're doing is actually trying it, and they go, oh, it doesn't fix my issue, I'll return it. So there's nothing wrong with the product, but they can return it. If I offer them a partial refund, just to cover the cost of the postage of sending it out there, will I be protected?
Do they call it? Are they honest about saying they changed their mind or it doesn't work, or do they call it a SNAD?
I would say it's a mix of everything.
I mean, technically we don't really want you using the partial refund tool for covering label costs if the item doesn't come back in the right condition. I mean, I'll be honest with you, if you use it occasionally, we're not going to know, but if you repeatedly use it for that, then that is not going to be defensible, and that's where we would turn off usage for it. That's where, if it's a SNAD, you can report it as, that first thing that I highlighted where you'll get the label credit, and I know probably in your category that £3.50 won't cover the full cost of that return, and that's something that we're working on. But I guess the problem, I don't fully get the problem, if it's actually a remorse return and they're honest about it, if you don't accept free returns, the buyer has to pay that return credit unless you're offering free returns.
Yeah, well, we offer free returns.
Okay.
It's just that sometimes they buy things just to see if it fixes the issue. But if it doesn't fix the issue, they just return it. And whether they obviously get a free label for the postage to return it to us, but we still have to pay to post it out because we offer free postage.
Right.
But it's just annoying that we have to cover that cost, and it's an expense to us. And I just kind of think.
I understand what you're saying. That's pain of a business, but like the buyer isn't technically doing something wrong, right? And if you look industry-wide, there's more and more expectation of being able to return items. And so I think it's an economic decision for you of whether you want to offer free returns or not. We always talk about, free returns will increase conversion, but then it increases costs, how you're talking about. So, I think the question for you is that if that's getting excessive from a cost standpoint to have buyer paid returns. Now that might drive up your false SNADs, but then you can use that report a buyer tool properly to get a label credit. But I know that doesn't address it perfectly, but that's kind of just a business challenge. No, I apologize. I'd love to take more questions. I'll be around, but I'm over time, so I want to be sensitive to the next speaker. So there's a seller panel coming on. Kirsty will be coming up, but I want to thank all of you for being a great audience, not throwing anything at me, being very civil. I enjoyed it. It was my pleasure to talk to all of you, and I'll be around to answer those questions I didn't get to take. Thank you.